Hey patrons, what's going on? Welcome to the most recent edition of Mosher's Mailbag. Of course, every week I take your questions that you message me on Patreon. I answer them. I put it up on the website. You get the answers, and that's how it goes. Want to thank everybody so far who's been asking questions. It's been really enjoyable to do something interactive like this. So I know we've got a couple of questions today from some patrons who are not happy. Obviously, a lot of Eagles fans disappointed about blowing a 17-0 lead in the fourth quarter to the Carolina Panthers. So let's get going with the questions. The first one comes from Steve A, and he asks, "Is it time to be worried about Jake Elliott?" The short answer is yeah, because the Eagles have this history of bringing in kickers who do really well year one, and then the next year not so good. Ever since obviously David Akers, who was the model of consistency. So you go back to Alex Henry a couple of years ago, man, 4 or 5 years ago, had a very nice rookie year. They used a fourth round pick on him. Came back the next year, not so good, and by year three, you could tell he was done. Then you go to Cody Parkey, had a nice first year with the Eagles. By year two, wasn't the same guy. And so last year, obviously, Jake Elliott had an incredible year, a magical year, and it just goes to show you how many things happened last year that has been hard to replicate in 2018, that being one of them. So far, Elliott 1 for 4 on kicks of 40 or more yards. That was kind of his specialty last year, the long distance kicks. Now, if you go back to the Panthers game, he missed a field goal at the north end zone, which was just a nightmare end zone for both kickers. Graham Gano missed a kick there and an extra point. So you had two missed field goals and a missed extra point because of the gusty winds there. So it's not so much in that case that there's something wrong with Jake Elliott. I think he had a missed field goal earlier in the year that was a bad snap. You'd like to see more consistency, clearly, but there's nothing they can do about it now unless he just completely bombs over the next few weeks and Howie has to bring in another kicker. We really won't know our answer about Jake Elliott and his consistency until the end of the year. I tend to think young kid works hard that he'll get it together. He's not missing by a lot, and I don't think he's missing every single game to a point where you worry about his confidence just yet. Mike M asks, "Are the offensive line struggles with Jason Peters and Lane Johnson and so forth and so on making Peterson not call runs?" I think there's a little bit to that, but certainly your offensive line needs to be playing well to pass the ball, and he's had no problems calling passes. But I do think some of the blocking on runs has not been great. I know there were a few against the Panthers that were not blocked up well, and you had not good runs. Not I don't think negative runs, but you just didn't have highly productive runs. And then when Doug Peterson sees that his runs aren't highly productive, whether it's an offensive line problem or just a running back's problem, it makes him just want to pass the ball more. So I do think there's a little bit of chicken and egg there, and I hope that if the Eagles do better up front blocking, especially this Sunday against Jacksonville, and the running backs themselves start to make more positive plays, then I think Doug Peterson will be more confident to call running plays. If you haven't had a chance yet, check out the Q&A that I did this week with Brian Westbrook. I posted it on Thursday. It was really interesting one. I think Brian had a lot of insight to give on the state of the Eagles running game, the running backs, Doug Peterson's play calling, whether or not they need another running back, and just his general thoughts on Wendell Smallwood, Corey Clement, and the Eagles running game. I put it up Thursday. I thought it was really interesting, so everybody should check it out. Next question from Frank G. "Do you think that the Super Bowl window is open for a while with Carson Wentz? And also regarding Wentz, what's up with the end of the games?" He asks. Frank wants to know if Carson is developing some kind of reputation for not being a good closer as a quarterback. Let's start with the first question. Do I think that the Eagles will have an open Super Bowl window for quite a while? Yeah, I do think they will, because it's pretty clear to me that Carson Wentz is an elite quarterback, and if you have an elite quarterback, then usually, not always, usually you're in pretty good standing to have an open door to a Super Bowl, if not every year, but consistently competing to be in Super Bowl contention. So with Carson, I think the Eagles are in very good shape. But obviously, they need to be able to keep adding to the roster. So with Howie and Joe Douglas, they've got to build around Carson the right way. And they're not going to have a lot of money to do it in the future, especially the way they pay Carson Wentz. Joe Douglas comes from the Baltimore Ravens chain. They've been able to piece together a very good roster year after year, pretty much. You know, they've had some ups and downs, but they're usually very good. And other teams like the Packers, the Patriots, the Saints, they're usually in contention, although some of those teams have had down years. I guess the one concern I would have is if you look at the Packers having Aaron Rodgers, it seems like after they won their 2010 Super Bowl, their only Super Bowl with Aaron Rodgers, that they really lost their identity overall. They became so Aaron Rodgers centric that they really didn't put a whole lot into the running game. And to the point where a couple of years ago, they had a losing record, and Aaron Rodgers had to lead them into the playoffs single handedly, and he had to be their leading rusher. You can't get to a point in which you start ignoring key positions on the field. And I hope that the Eagles don't take this tack where we're great with Carson and we don't need to put resources into skill positions like running back. I don't think that they will believe that, because even though they haven't drafted a running back other than Donnell Pumphrey over the last 3 years, they put a lot of work into scouting some of the biggest names. Ronald Jones. I think Zeke Elliott they looked into a couple of years ago, even though they weren't going to take him. There were a bunch of running backs that they have looked at in the draft over the last few years. It's just where they have drafted and what they went with and the value at that round. Running back never correlated, so they haven't gotten that guy. But one of the things I spoke about with Brian Westbrook in that Q&A is that this team is starting to has gotten away under Doug from a feature back, and they've gone by committee, and I don't know if they can continue to do that going forward. They really do need their kind of quote-unquote feature back just for Doug's psychological purposes, so he has somebody he's comfortable with feeding the ball more than 10 or 11 times a game. As for Carson not being able to close out games in the fourth quarter, I thought his rookie year, he had a couple of games at the end of the year where he did that against Washington. He fell a little short, but he led them back. And then the Ravens game, if you remember, as a rookie, he led them to a game-tying touchdown. Oh no, he led them to a touchdown that brought him within one, and Doug went for two instead of kicking the PAT. They didn't convert the 2-point conversion, so they didn't make it. But the issue with Carson is his career hasn't been very long, and for most of it, especially going back to last year, he's been playing from ahead. So you can't knock the guy for not having too many comeback victories because his team is always ahead because he's played so well. He made a great throw to Alshon Jeffrey to at least draw the interference, and yeah, he made some bad decisions on the last 2 or 3 passes of the game. I kind of think that's an isolated incident. I don't think he's lacking some kind of comeback chromosome or gene that the great ones have that he doesn't. His career is young. It is yet to be determined what kind of fourth quarter quarterback he's going to be. But right now, I'm not really concerned about it. Rose R. asks, if Nick Foles was still the Eagles quarterback, would they be playing better? Really, I don't think so, because outside of that last drive for Carson, he's had a really amazing comeback so far. His last 3 games, his passer rating has been over 115. So for 3 straight games, he's had a quarterback rating over 115 for the first time in his career. So he's actually been playing very, very well. The one difference is Nick Foles is a little bit more willing to hit a check down. When there's nothing open deep downfield, he'll pass it off to the underneath receiver or the running back out of the flat. Carson always tries to make a play. He's always trying to extend the play. And at times you can see, like the fourth quarter, like the last drive against the Panthers, it hurts a little bit. But I wouldn't trade that for going back to Nick Foles, as much as I respect Nick Foles for what he did. He won Super Bowl MVP. Very good quarterback, very streaky quarterback. You get a lot more consistency with Carson Wentz. Next question and last one comes from Bill A. And he says, has Doug got too full of himself after winning the Super Bowl to the point where he stands up at a podium and you can't second guess him? To the point where he stands up at the podium and you can't second guess him. And it's a really good question, because Doug has not won the podium over the last few days. I didn't like his comment about the pressure being off, because the pressure is not off. Nobody's written the Eagles off. They're 1 game under 500. NFC East, very winnable. So I don't know how you went from saying winning is the new norm to now, the pressure's off, nobody expects us to win. That seems to be a contradictory message. So didn't really think Doug was going down the right path with that. And I also think he went down a wrong path saying you can't question his run-pass ratio unless you've played the game. I mean, I'm not a weatherman, but I can tell you when it's cloudy and overcast. I can tell you when I think it's going to rain. So I think other people who have a lot more football knowledge, Brian Westbrook being one, Ron Jaworski being another, have come down on the Eagles for not running the ball enough in the fourth quarter. So I don't think you have to just be Doug Peterson to recognize that when you have a 17-point lead and you throw the ball 14 times on the next 15 plays, that's an issue. And now maybe you're not loving the running game at that moment. Maybe you're just really confident in the passing game. But regardless of how much football has changed, the dynamics of winning a game in the fourth quarter are still the same. You have a lead, you run the clock out, and you tire down your opponent, and you give them less time to try to mount a comeback. So, do I think Doug has gotten too full of himself? It's not that I think he's too full of himself. I think he's just having a very difficult time reacting to this adversity of being a Super Bowl champion head coach, and then every week you're playing a team that's giving you its best shot. Notice that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers beat the Eagles week 2 and then didn't win again until just last week, and that the Titans beat the Eagles 2 weeks later, and they haven't won since. So the Eagles are clearly getting everybody's best shot, and I think Doug's message to his team isn't necessarily getting through that they need to understand that every game needs to be their A-plus game. And in lieu of that, I think he's trying to come up with some excuses now and saying that the people are writing them off and that nobody can really question his play calling. So not a great week for Doug at the podium. That's going to do it for this edition of Mosher's Mailbag. Hope I answered all your questions well. I want to thank everybody for their interactions, for being subscribers. A programming note, you can catch me on, remember to catch me, Adam Kaplan, and Billy Osborne on the Inside the Birds podcast on radio.com. We also do a 1 hour Inside the Birds radio show on WIP from 3 to 4 o'clock every Saturday. And you can hear me on 97.3 ESPN Mondays with Mike Gill from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock, and also Thursdays from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. for the Mosher, McMullen, and Krause show. All right, everybody, thanks for tuning in. See you next week.